step out of the vehicle now, and don't get smart with me, because people like you lie for a living." The shove came without warning. Ethan Brooks felt his shoulder slam into the side window, a sharp flash of pain tearing through his arm as his breath left his chest. In that instant, with traffic roaring past and a gun hovering too close to his back, something deeper broke. This was the moment that would end careers, unravel lies, and follow every person involved for the rest of their lives. Before we go any further, take a moment. Where are you watching from today? If stories about truth, accountability, and justice matter to you, subscribe to the channel and give me a like. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Ethan Brooks had just completed a 12-hour shift with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. He was still in uniform, dark green and neatly pressed, the gold badge centered on his chest, his name clearly stitched above his pocket. He drove a county-issued black Ford Explorer, government plates visible, department markings clean and unmistakable. The radio played softly as he headed north on the Interstate 95, thinking about the promise he had made to his daughter. He would be early tonight. A movie, popcorn, laughter, simple things that kept him grounded after decades of service. 22 commendations had taught him discipline, restraint, and patience. They had not prepared him for what was about to happen. Behind him, a patrol car closed the distance. Jake Harlan sat behind the wheel, eyes locked on the Explorer ahead. He did not run the plate. He did not call it in. He did not ask questions. He made a decision based on instinct, and that instinct was poisoned. He said nothing official. He needed no justification in his own mind. Tyler Reed watched quietly from the passenger seat. Megan Walsh leaned forward from the back, already tense, already convinced they were right. The lights came on. Red and blue cut through the late afternoon. Ethan sighed once, steady and calm, and eased onto the shoulder. He did everything by the book. He placed both hands on the steering wheel. He lowered his window. He kept his posture straight. He spoke clearly when he keyed his radio, reporting the stop to his internal channel. There was no response yet. That was not unusual. He waited. He had learned long ago that patience was a form of armor. Jake approached fast. His hand hovered near his holster. His voice was loud, sharp, and deliberately hostile. He demanded documents that were already visible. Ethan responded evenly, identifying himself, stating his rank, his department, his status. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He knew escalation could be fatal. Megan moved behind the vehicle, circling with purpose. Tyler opened the passenger door without permission, touching papers that were not his to touch. The situation slipped from tense to dangerous in seconds. Jake told Ethan to step out. Ethan complied. The moment his boots hit the pavement, the tone shifted. Jake closed the distance. He accused. He sneered. He dismissed the badge as if it meant nothing. When Ethan tried once more to speak, to explain, to slow the moment, the shove came. The pain was sharp but controlled. The humiliation was worse. Ethan tasted metal and blood and swallowed it back. He focused on his breathing. He kept his hands visible. He did not resist. Inside, something else was happening. A calm alarm sounded on his wrist, a silent call for help. Stephanie Ortiz received it and did not hesitate. She knew Ethan. She trusted him. She understood what that signal meant. Within seconds, phones rang that were not meant to ring on a Saturday afternoon. Names moved through command channels with urgency. One of those names was Victoria Morales. Traffic slowed, drivers stared. 2 civilians pulled over, sensing something was wrong. One raised a phone, then another. Ethan did not look at them. He stared straight ahead at the hood of his own vehicle. He thought of his daughter waiting. He thought of how many times he had taught younger deputies to remain calm when dignity was being stripped from them. He held on to that lesson now. Jake continued to talk. His words were careless. His tone was cruel. He believed himself untouchable. He did not notice the cameras. He did not imagine consequences. He saw only power, and power made him reckless. Tyler stood frozen, trapped between obedience and fear. Megan barked orders that made no sense. Her voice tight with anger she could not explain. None of them realized that the balance had already shifted. Ethan felt the sting along his elbow where skin had torn. He felt the weight of years pressing down on that moment. He had worn the same uniform as the men around him. He had enforced the same laws. He had sworn the same oath. And still, here he was, treated as an enemy on the side of a freeway he had patrolled for most of his adult life. He did not know who was watching yet. He did not know how fast the images were spreading. He did not know that within minutes. This stop would escape the shoulder of the Interstate 95 and move into millions of hands across the country. What he did know was simple and devastating. This was wrong, and wrong, once seen clearly, has a way of demanding its price. Somewhere down the line, long after the bruises faded and the reports were filed, people would look back at this moment and call it a turning point. They would say it was inevitable. It was not. It was a choice made by men who believed they would never be held accountable. And on that Saturday afternoon, under open sky and watchful eyes, that belief began to collapse. Ethan Brooks remained facing the hood, palms flat, fingers spread wide as instructed, even as his shoulder throbbed and his elbow burned where skin had split. He keyed his radio again, slower this time, forcing calm into every syllable. Unit 27. David, repeating. Traffic stop on Interstate 95 northbound at mile marker 42. I am requesting supervisory response. The transmission crackled and went unanswered. That silence told Jake Harlan exactly what he wanted to hear. Jake stepped closer, invading the last inch of space Ethan had left, his shadow falling over the badge that should have ended this before it began. Nobody's coming, Jake said. That's how this works. Ethan did not turn his head. He did not raise his voice. Someone always comes. He replied, eventually. Jake smiled at that, thin and humorless. Not for you, he said. Megan Walsh moved with restless energy behind them, her boots scraping against asphalt as she circled the vehicle again, scanning traffic, scanning Ethan, scanning for threats that did not exist. Her hand rested on her baton. Her posture was aggressive, practiced, ready to justify force if the moment demanded it. He's not cooperating, she said loudly, planting the narrative she wanted on record. Tyler Reed flinched at the word. He stood at the open passenger door, documents in hand, staring down at the registration that clearly read Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. His mouth opened once, then closed. He said nothing. His silence became part of the scene. Jake leaned in again, lowering his voice so only Ethan could hear. You think wearing that uniform makes you safe? He said. It doesn't. He shoved Ethan's shoulder harder this time, grinding him against the hood, the pressure deliberate, humiliating. Ethan felt his breath hitch, felt pain shoot down his arm. He tasted blood again. Still, he did not resist. Years of training held him in place. Years of knowing how quickly resistance could be rewritten as aggression kept his body still. You're hurting me, Ethan said evenly. There is no cause for this. Jake's answer was a scoff. You don't get to tell me what cause is, he said. I decide, inside his sleeve. His watch vibrated softly. Ethan shifted his wrist a fraction of an inch, enough to confirm the alert had gone through. Stephanie Ortiz's name filled his mind, not as hope, but as certainty. She would act. She always did. Miles away. Her phone buzzed and she froze where she stood. She recognized the code instantly. Ethan never used it unless he had no other choice. She dialed command, then dialed again. We have a deputy in distress. She said, Ethan Brooks, Full uniform, county vehicle. He's being detained. The tone of her voice cut through layers of bureaucracy. Names moved quickly now. Authority began to shift, though no one on the freeway knew it yet. Back on the shoulder. Traffic crawled past, drivers craning their necks to look. A woman in a gray sedan slowed almost to a stop. Her phone raised. Camera steady. Another driver pulled over farther back, hazard lights flashing, recording from a different angle. Megan noticed and snapped. "Put the phone down," she shouted, marching toward the woman. "This is police business." The woman did not move. "That's exactly why I'm recording," she replied, her voice shaking but firm. Megan reached for the phone, grabbing it roughly. "I said stop," she barked. The woman pulled back, shouting now, drawing more eyes. Jake glanced over, irritated, not yet alarmed. He still believed this was contained. Ethan felt the weight of every passing second. He felt the sting along his elbow where blood slid slowly toward his wrist. He felt the humiliation of being pressed against his own vehicle, treated as a suspect by officers who shared his oath. He spoke again. Not for Jake, but for the record being created all around them. "My name is Deputy Ethan Brooks," he said clearly, badge number visible. "I am requesting a supervisor." Jake responded by tightening his grip on Ethan's uniform, fingers brushing the edge of the badge. "You're going to make this worse," Jake warned. Ethan met the threat with silence. He knew that anything more would be twisted. Tyler shifted his stance, unease growing. He could hear the phones now. He could see the faces watching. He could feel the moment slipping beyond their control. "Jake," he said quietly, barely audible. "The plate checks out." Jake shot him a look sharp enough to cut. "I didn't ask," he replied. Tyler swallowed and stepped back, his compliance complete. The sound of sirens cut through the air, faint at first, then unmistakable. Red and blue reflections danced across passing cars. Ethan's jaw tightened. Jake straightened slightly, scanning the road for the first time. Uncertainty flickered across his face. "Probably traffic," he muttered, as much to himself as anyone else. Megan turned too, her grip on the confiscated phone loosening as she realized the attention was no longer theoretical. It was arriving. Jake stepped away from Ethan, just a fraction, as if to regain composure. "Stay right there," he ordered, pointing at the hood. Ethan did not move. He did not need to be told. He had not moved when moving might have helped him. He would not move now. The sirens grew louder. The crowd of stopped vehicles grew larger. Comments flooded live streams in real time, voices layering over one another, disbelief spreading faster than the traffic jam. Within command channels, decisions were being made with speed and precision. Victoria Morales listened, asked one question, and ended the call. She was already on the road. Internal Affairs was notified before anyone on the shoulder understood what that meant. Body camera footage was flagged automatically. Dash cameras synced, digital trails locked in place. The truth, once slippery, was now anchored. Jake tried to regain control with volume. "Back up," he shouted at the onlookers. "Everyone back up." His authority rang hollow. People did not move. Phones stayed raised. Ethan stared straight ahead, shoulders squared despite the pain. He knew now that this was no longer just about him. This moment had grown beyond the three officers surrounding him. It belonged to everyone watching, everyone recording, everyone who would see what happened next. The sirens were close now. Jake's jaw clenched. Megan's posture stiffened. Tyler looked down at the pavement, shame written across his face. Ethan breathed in slowly, then out. He did not feel relief yet. He felt resolve. Whatever happened when those vehicles arrived, whatever words were spoken next, the lie that had justified this stop was already dead. The spark had become a flame, and it would not be smothered. Angela Rivera felt it in her chest before she understood it in her head. The scene ahead did not look like a routine stop. It looked tense, It looked wrong. She guided her car onto the shoulder at a careful distance, hazard lights blinking, hands steady as she lifted her phone. She did not speak at first. She did not need to. The image told the story on its own. A black sheriff's deputy in full uniform stood pressed against the hood of a county vehicle. 3 officers surrounded him. One stood too close, another circled, a third hovered near an open door. Within seconds, viewers began to appear on her screen. The count climbed fast. Comments stacked. "He's in uniform. Why are they touching him? This makes no sense." Michael Harris saw the same thing and trusted his instincts. He pulled his truck in behind Angela, keeping space, angling his camera for a clear view. He hit record and then called emergency services. His voice was calm, measured, precise. He described what he saw without speculation. A uniformed deputy detained by officers, possible excessive force, location confirmed. He stayed on the line. He understood that accuracy mattered. His camera caught everything Angela's could not. 2 angles, 2 witnesses, no confusion. Jake Harlan felt the air shift as the phones came out. Authority, when it is real, does not fear witnesses. Jake did. He raised his voice, sharper now, louder than necessary. "Clear the area." He shouted, "Keep moving." No one moved. The shoulder filled with stopped cars, windows lowered, faces watched, phones rose higher. Megan Walsh turned and locked onto Angela, her frustration spilling over. "Turn that off," she yelled. "This is police business." Angela did not step back. Her hands shook, but her voice held. "This is public," she said. "You are on camera." Megan lunged forward and grabbed the phone, jerking it sideways. The image wobbled but stayed live. Angela cried out, "Give it back." Michael's camera captured the moment cleanly. The comment feed exploded. She took her phone. "That's illegal. Don't touch her." Ethan Brooks kept his eyes forward, jaw set, shoulders squared. He felt the warm line of blood trail down his elbow, soaking into the fabric of his sleeve. He ignored it. He knew the smallest reaction could be twisted into justification. He focused on his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. When he spoke, it was clear and deliberate. "I am not resisting," he said. "I am requesting a supervisor." Jake laughed, but the sound was thinner now. "You're putting on a show," Jake replied. "You want attention?" Ethan said nothing. He did not need to. The attention had already arrived. Tyler Reed stood a few steps back, papers in his hand, eyes darting between the phones and the badge on Ethan's chest. He knew what those documents said. He knew the vehicle was county-issued. He knew this should have ended before it began. His mouth opened once. He considered speaking. Then he saw Jake's face and stayed silent. That silence weighed on him immediately. It would weigh on him for years. Megan turned back from Angela, phone still in her grip, anger hardening into something close to panic. "They're interfering," she said, loud enough for cameras to catch it. She was building a record, trying to control the story. Jake nodded, seizing on it. "You're obstructing." He shouted at the crowd. "Back up now." No one backed up. More drivers had stopped. Some stepped out cautiously, keeping distance, recording from behind doors and mirrors. The shoulder of the freeway no longer belonged to the officers. It belonged to the public. Across the city, the live stream leapt from screen to screen. A clip was cut and reposted, then another. Accounts with large followings shared it without comment. There was no need for commentary. The visual was enough. A uniformed deputy, hands on the hood, an officer's hand too close to his shoulder, a woman shouting for her phone. Comments flooded in faster than they could be read. "He's wearing the badge. Run the plate. This is profiling." The hashtag appeared organically, simple and unavoidable. Within minutes, it trended. The sound of sirens cut through the noise, faint at first, then unmistakable. Red and blue reflections rippled across passing cars, across the lenses of phones held steady by people who refused to look away. Jake scanned the road, irritation giving way to unease. He had expected compliance. He had expected silence. He had not expected witnesses. Megan's grip loosened. She glanced from one camera to another, realizing how many angles were capturing her face. Michael narrated quietly for those watching, careful not to speculate. Multiple units approaching. He said, "Response appears internal." His calm steadiness anchored the moment. Ethan felt a strange stillness settle over him. Pain remained. Humiliation remained. But fear had shifted. It no longer belonged only to him. He spoke again, not to argue, not to plead, but to mark the moment. "I have complied," he said. "I am asking this to stop." His voice carried clearly. It was captured cleanly. It spread outward, clipped and shared, a statement of fact that could not be erased. Megan turned back to Angela and thrust the phone into her hands, hard enough to jolt her. "Leave!" she snapped. Angela did not leave. She stepped back, raised the phone again, and kept recording. "You should be ashamed," she said, her voice shaking but strong. The comment feed surged. Applause emojis, words of disbelief, calls for accountability. Jake tried to step back into control, moving toward Ethan again. But the sirens were close now. Vehicles slowed to a standstill. Doors opened. More phones rose. The shoulder had become a stage, and the audience was no longer passive. The 1st Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department unit pulled in, lights flashing. A hush rippled through the crowd. Not silence, but focus. Ethan did not turn. He kept his eyes forward, hands still visible. He felt the pivot happen, the balance of power shifting in a way that could not be reversed. Somewhere far beyond the freeway, people were watching live. They were forming opinions. They were saving clips. They were asking questions that would demand answers. Jake took a half step back, recalculating. Megan stood rigid, jaw tight. Tyler stared at the pavement. Michael kept recording. Angela steadied her hands. Ethan breathed in and out, slow and even. He knew now that this moment had escaped the control of anyone who wanted it buried. It lived in phones and feeds and memory. Whatever happened next, whatever words were spoken when authority finally arrived, the truth of this stop had already been preserved. As more lights filled the shoulder and the sirens faded into a controlled silence, one fact stood clear to everyone watching, near and far. This was no longer a question of misunderstanding. It was a test, unfolding in real time, of whether power would protect itself or correct itself, and with every second recorded. That answer drew closer. The 1st Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department patrol car cut across lanes with authority, its lights washing the stalled traffic in red and blue. A second followed close behind, then a third. Sirens shut down almost at once, not fading in confusion, but ending cleanly, as if on command. Doors opened, boots hit pavement in controlled rhythm. The noise of the freeway seemed to lower itself, as though the moment demanded attention. Phones stayed raised, but voices dropped. Everyone sensed that something had changed. Victoria Morales stepped out of the lead vehicle. She did not hurry. She did not scan for cameras. She walked forward with purpose, posture straight, eyes sharp, taking in the scene in one disciplined sweep. A uniformed deputy pressed against a hood, blood on a sleeve. 3 officers positioned not as colleagues, but as captors, civilians recording from every angle. She stopped several feet away and spoke without raising her voice. "What the hell is going on here?" The question was not emotional. It was surgical. Jake Harlan snapped to attention, relief flickering across his face before calculation replaced it. "Suspicious vehicle," he said quickly. Driver was uncooperative. Victoria did not respond immediately. She looked past him. She looked at Ethan Brooks. She took in the badge, the uniform, the controlled stillness of a man holding himself together under pressure. Her eyes dropped to the blood on his elbow, then lifted again. When she turned back to Jake, her expression had hardened, suspicious. She repeated, "You stopped a clearly marked county vehicle, driven by a uniformed deputy. On what grounds?" Jake opened his mouth. The words did not come. Megan shifted her weight. Tyler stared at the pavement. Silence filled the space where justification should have been. Victoria stepped closer to Ethan. Her tone softened, but her authority did not. "Deputy Brooks," she said, "are you injured?" Ethan answered immediately. "Yes, ma'am." He said, "Minor injuries. I complied with all commands. I requested a supervisor multiple times." His voice was steady. It carried. Phones caught every word. Victoria nodded once. She turned to Jake again. "Did you run the plate?" she asked. No answer. "Did you verify his identity before using force?" Again. Nothing. The silence was no longer neutral. It was damning. Her voice carried farther now, deliberate, precise. "That is Deputy Sergeant Ethan Brooks," she said. 17 years of service, 22 commendations, and you have him bleeding on the side of a freeway." Jake tried to recover. "Chief, we believed—" She cut him off without raising her voice. "You believed wrong." The words landed clean and final. There was no argument left to make. She turned and issued orders with calm efficiency. "Separate them," she said. "Now." 2 deputies moved instantly, positioning themselves between Ethan and the 3 officers. The physical space mattered. It reset the scene. Power shifted not through force, but through authority exercised correctly. Unmarked vehicles pulled in moments later. Brian Fletcher stepped out first, already reviewing notes on a tablet. Jennifer Adams followed, eyes up, scanning, documenting. Internal Affairs had arrived, not in haste, but with precision. They had seen the footage. They did not ask broad questions. Brian spoke quietly to Ethan. "Medical is on the way," he said. "You're safe now." Ethan nodded once. Jennifer addressed Jake. "Megan and Tyler, you are being placed under administrative detention," she said. "Remain where you are." Jake scoffed. "This is absurd," he said. "We were doing our jobs." Victoria turned toward him slowly. "Your job does not include violating civil rights," she said, "or assaulting a fellow deputy." She paused, then gave the order that sealed the moment. "Cuff them," she said. "All 3. The words hung for half a second before action followed. Jake stared at her, disbelief spreading across his face. Megan's color drained. Tyler swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the ground. Deputies stepped in. The sound of handcuffs closing echoed against the concrete barrier. One click, then another, then a third. The crowd reacted audibly now. Gasps, shouts of disbelief. Someone clapped once, sharp and loud. Phones zoomed closer. The reversal was complete. Ethan was guided gently away from the hood. A medic arrived and began examining his shoulder and elbow, speaking quietly, professionally. Ethan lowered himself onto the bumper of a patrol car. Breathing deep as the adrenaline faded, Victoria stood nearby, giving him space but not leaving. "I'm sorry this happened," she said quietly. Ethan met her eyes. "So am I," he replied. There was no anger in his voice, only fatigue, and something heavier beneath it. Jake sat on the asphalt, hands cuffed behind his back, staring at nothing. Megan stood rigid, jaw clenched, eyes forward. Tyler looked down at his cuffs, the weight of his choices settling in. Brian Fletcher read them their rights, his tone even, unemotional. Jennifer Adams documented positions, times, statements. Body cameras were collected, dash cameras were flagged. Nothing was left unsecured. The live streams continued, capturing not just the fall, but the process that followed it. Victoria addressed the gathered civilians briefly. She did not lecture. She did not threaten. "This situation is under control," she said. "Thank you for remaining calm." She did not ask anyone to stop recording. She understood that transparency now was not optional. It was necessary. Traffic began to move slowly, reluctantly. Some drivers lingered, unwilling to leave before seeing it through. Angela Rivera lowered her phone for the first time, hands shaking now that the tension had broken. Michael Harris ended his call with emergency services, thanking the operator before hanging up. Neither spoke. They did not need to. What they had recorded would speak louder than anything they could say. Victoria watched as the three officers were escorted toward separate vehicles. She knew what came next. Interviews, reviews, charges, consequences that would follow them long after the cameras shut off. She also knew this moment would ripple far beyond the Interstate 95. It would enter conversations, hearings, courtrooms. She turned back to Ethan as the medic finished bandaging his arm. "You did everything right," she said. Ethan nodded once. He did not smile. He looked out at the shoulder where truth had finally caught up with arrogance. As command vehicles remained and the last sirens faded into controlled silence, one fact settled over everyone still watching, both on the freeway and across the country. This was not a mistake quietly corrected. This was accountability applied in daylight, under witness, with procedure and resolve. And for the first time since the stop began, there was nowhere left to hide. The room had no windows by design. It did not allow daylight, distraction, or comfort over the next 48 hours. It became the place where reputations collapsed and truth hardened into record. Brian Fletcher sat at the center of it all, his voice low and precise, guiding the process with patience earned over decades. Jennifer Adams sat beside him, her notes meticulous, her questions exact. They did not rush. They did not editorialize. They let evidence speak, and it spoke loudly. The first body camera clip played without interruption. Jake Harlan's voice filled the room, sharp, dismissive, edged with contempt. The language was unmistakable. A racial slur, followed by laughter, followed by a command that had no legal grounding. The footage continued. The shove, the proximity, the tone. No pause, no hesitation. When the clip ended, Brian did not speak. Silence settled in, heavy and deliberate. Jennifer advanced the timestamp, another angle, another camera, the same behavior, the same words, the same posture of dominance. There was no confusion about context. There was no ambiguity to debate. Jake sat across the table in plain clothes, stripped of the uniform that had once insulated him. His hands were clasped too tightly. At first, he tried to explain. He said he felt threatened. He said the situation escalated quickly. He said he was trained to trust his instincts. Brian listened without interruption, letting Jake exhaust his explanations. Then Brian slid a folder across the table, 7 prior complaints. 3 sustained findings involving racial profiling, written warnings, mandatory retraining orders, signed acknowledgments. "This isn't a lapse," Brian said quietly. "It's a history." Jake stared at the file, the weight of it settling in. His voice dropped. "They never fired me before," he said. Brian met his eyes. "They should have corrected you then," he replied. "Now it's too late." In another interview room, Tyler Reed sat with his shoulders hunched, eyes rimmed red. Jennifer Adams kept her tone even, her questions direct. Tyler did not deny what happened. He admitted he knew the stop was wrong the moment he saw the badge. He admitted he felt pressure to stay quiet. Jake said he'd handle it. Tyler said, "He told me not to contradict him in front of civilians." Jennifer nodded once. "And you agreed?" she said. Tyler swallowed. "Yes." The word landed heavily. He looked down at his hands. "I didn't want to be the next target." Jennifer recorded the statement carefully. Fear explains silence. She said, "It does not excuse it." Tyler did not argue. He knew that truth would follow him long after the interview ended. Megan Walsh's interview carried a different energy. Her posture was rigid, her answers fast and defensive. She blamed exhaustion, she blamed stress, she blamed interference from bystanders. Brian listened, then played back the footage of her grabbing Angela Rivera's phone. Her voice raised, her hand forceful. The image froze on the screen. "Stress does not authorize unlawful conduct," Brian said calmly, "and it does not permit intimidation of civilians." Megan's defenses cracked, her shoulders sagged. The explanations stopped working. All that remained was record. Throughout the building, analysts worked in silence. Dash cameras synced seamlessly with body cameras, audio tracks aligned, timestamps matched across devices. Angela Rivera's live stream was archived in full, unedited, preserved frame by frame. Michael Harris's recording filled every gap with clinical clarity. Experts slowed footage to examine distance, body language, escalation without cause. There were no missing seconds, no corrupted files, no technical excuses. The story was complete, and it was consistent, in a quiet office down the hall. Ethan Brooks sat with his arm bandaged. The sting dulled but not gone. Laura Bennett sat across from him, legal pads neatly arranged, her tone calm and deliberate. She did not dramatize what had happened. She laid it out plainly. Federal civil rights violations, unlawful detention, excessive force, retaliation. "The evidence is overwhelming," she said. "This will not be difficult to prove." Ethan listened, nodding once. "I don't want vengeance," he said. "I want change." Laura met his gaze. "Accountability is how systems change," she replied. She outlined damages carefully: physical injury, emotional harm, professional humiliation, long-term impact. "Conservatively," she said. $1.8 million. Ethan exhaled slowly. The number was large, but it was not the point. What mattered was what it represented. Sheriff David Mitchell reviewed the footage personally. He watched every angle without interruption, his expression tightening with each minute. When it ended, he sat back and folded his hands. "Prepare the termination packets," he said quietly. "All three." He authorized immediate cooperation with prosecutors and instructed communications to prepare a public statement. This would not be minimized. It would not be delayed. Silence would only deepen the damage. Jake Harlan was informed first. Brian delivered the decision without emotion. Immediate termination, referral for criminal charges, pension review. Jake's shoulders collapsed inward. "You're destroying my life," he said hoarsely. Brian did not raise his voice. "Your choices did that," he replied. He stood and ended the interview. Tyler Reed received his outcome next. 9-month unpaid suspension, mandatory 500-hour anti-bias and ethics training, reassignment to desk duty pending further review. Tyler nodded, tears finally breaking free. He did not argue. He knew it could have been worse. He also knew he would never forget the cost of his silence. Megan Walsh was told last: demotion, loss of specialized assignment, civil exposure already underway. Her attorney spoke for her now. But the damage was irreversible. Her image was circulating across news networks, stripped of excuses and framed by evidence, late that night. The building grew quiet. Ethan stood alone in the hallway where plaques commemorated years of service. Victoria Morales joined him, her presence steady. "This is going to be loud," she said. Ethan nodded. "It already is." She paused, then spoke again. "You didn't have to be perfect," she said. "You just had to be truthful." Ethan breathed in slowly. He thought of his daughter. He thought of the deputies he had trained. He thought of how close this moment had come to ending very differently, in that windowless room. Where excuses failed and records endured, one reality had settled beyond dispute. What happened on the Interstate 95 was no longer a matter of opinion. It was documented. It was undeniable. and it marked the beginning of consequences that could no longer be postponed. The consequences unfolded with a speed that surprised even seasoned observers, not because the system suddenly became compassionate, but because the evidence left no room for delay. By the start of the week, formal notices were delivered, stamped, logged, and irreversible. Jake Harlan's termination was executed without ceremony. His badge was collected, his weapon was inventoried and sealed, his access credentials were revoked before noon. The termination letter cited violations line by line, each supported by time-stamped footage, sworn statements, and a documented history that could no longer be minimized. Within hours, prosecutors filed charges. 2 counts of assault on a peace officer. 1 count of civil rights violation under federal statute. The language was precise, stripped of emotion, and devastating in its clarity. Jake read the documents in silence, seated across from counsel who spoke carefully about process and possible outcomes. Probation was discussed. Incarceration was not ruled out. The most crushing blow came quietly, almost as an afterthought. His pension was frozen pending review. The benefit he had assumed untouchable was suddenly uncertain. The system he had trusted to protect him now moved with the same indifference he had once shown others. There was no speech, no apology, only procedure. Tyler Reed's outcome arrived next, delivered in a smaller room with fewer witnesses. 9 months unpaid suspension, mandatory completion of 500 hours of anti-bias, ethics, and intervention training, immediate reassignment to administrative desk duty, no patrol authority, no supervisory pathway for the foreseeable future. The report acknowledged his cooperation and his eventual admission. It also documented his failure to act when action was required. Tyler signed the acknowledgement with shaking hands. He did not protest. He understood that the record would follow him for the rest of his career, a permanent reminder that silence carried its own cost. Megan Walsh received her notice later that day. The timing was deliberate. Demotion to basic patrol officer, removal from specialized units, loss of rank-based privileges. The civil case against her moved quickly, driven by footage that required no interpretation. The moment she seized Angela Rivera's phone played repeatedly in filings and hearings. Stripped of context, frozen in fact, the settlement amount was severe, $650,000 in personal liability. Her insurance declined full coverage within weeks. She filed for personal bankruptcy. Statements from her attorney spoke of pressure and exhaustion, but the public response was unmoved. The images had already decided the matter. Sheriff David Mitchell addressed the public from the department's main briefing room 2 days later. He stood alone at the podium, command staff seated behind him, the department seal centered and unavoidable. He did not deflect responsibility. He did not hedge his language. What occurred on the Interstate 95 was unacceptable. He said, it violated the law, department policy, and the trust of the community. He apologized directly to Ethan Brooks by name. He then announced a comprehensive $50 million reform initiative. The details were specific: independent oversight with subpoena authority, mandatory early intervention systems for repeat complaints, expanded body camera audits reviewed by external panels, clear duty to intervene requirements, enforceable with discipline. The reforms were not framed as goodwill. They were framed as correction. Public reaction was immediate and sustained. Peaceful protests formed outside county buildings and courthouses. Signs were held high. Chants echoed through city blocks. The video played on large screens, no longer shocking, but instructive. It became a reference point in discussions about authority and accountability. Community leaders demanded meetings. Victoria Morales attended many of them personally. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, she did not offer slogans. She offered timelines and benchmarks. Trust, she acknowledged, would not return on command. It would have to be earned in federal court. Laura Bennett advanced the civil case with methodical precision. The Section 1983 claim moved swiftly. The county's legal team reviewed the evidence and advised settlement. There was no viable defense. Prolonging the case would only deepen the damage. The settlement matched projections, $1.8 million. The agreement included binding non-monetary terms, policy changes, training mandates, ongoing external review. Ethan Brooks read every page before signing. He did not smile when it was done. He understood that compensation did not erase humiliation or pain. It acknowledged them. Nothing more. Jake Harlan appeared at his arraignment weeks later, standing alone at the defense table. No uniform, no badge, no authority. The charges were read aloud. Each count stated clearly for the record. The judge's tone was neutral and firm. Conditions were imposed. Firearms surrendered permanently. Travel restricted. Probation recommended pending further proceedings. When court recessed, Jake walked out through a side door, cameras following despite his refusal to look up. The image circulated widely, a stark contrast to the confidence once displayed on the freeway. Tyler Reed began his reassignment quietly. He reported to an office far from patrol, processing records and compliance reports. The training sessions were long and uncomfortable. They forced him to confront the cost of inaction, the damage done by deference to the wrong authority. He listened. He took notes. Whether the experience would change him permanently remained uncertain. The system had chosen correction over expulsion. It had not offered absolution. Megan Walsh returned to patrol under a different reality, stripped of status, stripped of insulation. Every interaction now carried scrutiny. Media coverage shifted from outrage to cautionary example. Former colleagues kept their distance. Supervisors documented everything. The authority she once exercised casually now came with limits she could not ignore. Ethan Brooks watched these developments from a deliberate distance. He testified when required. He attended hearings when summoned. His statements were brief, factual, and consistent. He did not insult. He did not celebrate. When asked by reporters how it felt to see careers dismantled, he answered with restraint. Accountability matters. He said, "That's all." His credibility remained intact because he never reached beyond the truth. Within the department, change took hold unevenly but visibly. Supervisors reviewed complaints with new urgency. Body camera audits increased in frequency and depth. The duty to intervene was no longer an abstract principle. It was written into evaluations and enforced with discipline. Training materials repeated the message without apology. See it, stop it, report it, or answer for it. What began as a traffic stop had become a reckoning not because of outrage alone, but because the system had been forced to confront itself in public view. Careers ended, futures shifted, policies rewrote themselves under pressure. The process was imperfect and incomplete, but it was real, for once. Consequences matched conduct. And that fact, more than any settlement or statement, marked the true weight of what had occurred. 3 months after the stop on the Interstate 95, Ethan Brooks returned to duty without announcement and without ceremony. There was no press release, no staged photograph. He reported early, as he always had, buttoned his uniform carefully, and stood for a moment before pinning on his badge. It felt heavier now, not with pride, but with meaning. The department had changed his assignment. He was no longer placed in routine patrol rotation. Instead, his days were spent in training rooms, briefing halls, and classrooms that had once treated ethics as a checkbox rather than a standard. He had been appointed lead instructor for the department's newly mandated ethical policing and de-escalation program. He did not ask for the role. He accepted it because it mattered. Ethan did not teach from slides alone. He taught from experience. He spoke in short sentences, clear sentences. He told recruits that authority was not proven by force, but by restraint. He told veterans that silence was not neutrality. It was participation. When he played footage, He did not narrate it. He paused it. He asked one question and waited. What should have happened here? The room often stayed quiet longer than was comfortable. He allowed that discomfort. He knew growth lived there, when answers came. He corrected without humiliation and without apology. Respect was not optional. Intervention was not negotiable. The tone was firm, not emotional. That was what made it effective. Attendance was mandatory at first. Engagement followed later. Deputies who had dismissed reform language in the past now leaned forward. Some asked questions after class, quietly, without cameras. Ethan answered all of them the same way, honestly. He did not present himself as a hero. He presented himself as a warning and a reminder. The lesson was simple. The badge does not protect you from consequences. It magnifies them, beyond the department. The video continued to move. Angela Rivera's live stream crossed 42 million views across platforms, replayed not for shock, but for clarity. Journalism schools dissected it frame by frame. Law schools debated it in civil rights courses. When the Pulitzer Committee announced its annual awards, Angela's name appeared under citizen journalism. She stood at the podium briefly, voice steady, and said only that she had not planned to become part of history. She had simply refused to look away. She thanked Ethan by name. She thanked Michael Harris. She thanked every person who chose to record instead of turning their head. Michael declined interviews. He issued one short written statement and nothing more. He said that accountability required witnesses and that silence only benefited the wrong people. His footage remained part of the public record, unedited and precise, used in court filings, training modules, and oversight hearings. It did not age. It did not soften. It continued to speak. Community forums did not disappear after the headlines faded. They evolved. Anger did not vanish, but it sharpened into expectation. Residents asked specific questions. How often are complaints reviewed now? Who reviews them? What happens if a supervisor ignores them? Victoria Morales attended many of those meetings herself. She stood without a podium. She gave numbers. She gave timelines. She admitted where progress lagged. She did not promise perfection. She promised enforcement. Trust did not return overnight, but it began to move, slowly, because consistency replaced denial. One late afternoon, traffic slowed again on the Interstate 95, this time for a disabled vehicle on the shoulder. Ethan spotted it during routine monitoring and pulled over without hesitation. The driver was a black man in his 30s, phone pressed to his ear, shoulders tight with frustration. When Ethan approached, he did so deliberately, hands visible, posture open. "Good afternoon," he said calmly. "I'm Deputy Brooks. How can I help you today?" The man hesitated, eyes scanning Ethan's uniform, his face, the badge. Then he exhaled. "Car just quit." He said, "Didn't know who to call." Ethan helped push the vehicle to safety. He waited until assistance arrived. He made sure the man was okay before leaving, when they shook hands. The grip lingered a moment longer than necessary. It was a small exchange. It carried weight. At home. Ethan noticed the changes in himself before anyone commented on them. He slept lighter. He listened more carefully. He answered his daughter's questions with honesty measured for her age. When she asked why people sometimes recognized him, he chose his words carefully, because doing the right thing matters. He said. She nodded and returned to her homework. To her. The answer was enough. The case became a reference point in policy circles. Other departments requested copies of the training curriculum. State legislators cited the reforms during hearings. Oversight committees referenced the incident as an example of accountability achieved through evidence rather than rhetoric. Internal memos began using a phrase that Ethan never used himself, the Brooks model. He ignored it. He focused on the work. Jake Harlan's appeals moved through the system quietly and failed. His name faded from headlines. Tyler Reed completed his training and remained reassigned, his future uncertain, his record permanent. Megan Walsh continued on patrol under stricter supervision, her authority narrowed, her actions documented. None of them were erased. They were redefined by consequence, on a clear evening. Ethan stood on an overpass overlooking the city, watching traffic stream beneath him. Los Angeles moved the way it always had, restless and relentless. He touched the badge on his chest once, not out of pride, but out of resolve. It no longer represented power to him. It represented duty, humility, and restraint. Justice had not arrived in a single moment. It rarely did. It arrived in records preserved, in cameras turned on, in supervisors who chose action over comfort, in civilians who refused to look away. What began as humiliation had become instruction. What began as abuse had become reform. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Ethan turned and walked back to his vehicle. The work was ongoing. The responsibility remained. As the sun dipped low and the city lights rose, the badge caught the light once more. This time, it did not glare. It reflected. Thank you for staying with this story. If it moved you, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with someone who believes accountability matters. Your support helps keep stories like this alive.